Welcome to Level with Emily. This is a conversation with composer Austin Wintory about his music for Aliens Fireteam Elite, which is a squad shooter from a studio called Cold Iron Studios. And it's within the Aliens universe, you know, the face-hugging, chest-exploding, H.R. Giger designed aliens. And the soundtrack is absolutely fantastic. There are a lot of subtle and maybe less subtle references to the early scores, which, by the way, the first Alien movie, that was done by Jerry Goldsmith. The second movie, Aliens, was scored by James Horner, and Aliens 3 was scored by Elliot Goldenthal. So we talk about all three of those composers as well, Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner, and Elliot Goldenthal. Anyway, Austin's score is fantastic, and there are a lot of really great acoustic elements with instruments like oboe, the instruments called the serpent, the zaphoon, but there's also more recognizable instruments that are highlighted, like just low brass in general, tuba, trombone. That's all wonderful. There's some didgeridoo in there, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's wonderful. And of course, synthesized elements too. There's a lot of distorted electric bass, which is very cool. So at one point in our conversation, Austin will reference a phrase, sticks with boots on. Now, before he and I hit record, we were getting caught up. We hadn't talked in a really long time. So we were just getting caught up and talking about music and talking about his videos, which are fantastic. You must visit Austin's YouTube channel because he has all these kind of score realizations where you can see the music in varying ways, and just talking about how to show music to someone who doesn't read music. And so I told him a story of my friend Nikki, who doesn't read music, and he says that when he sees music, written music notation, he thinks it looks like sticks with boots on, some of which you can see through, which is fantastic description of music notation. So I shared that with Austin, and he promised he would bring it up in the interview, and he does twice.
Sticks with boots on is all part of the unreleased director's cut of this episode.
It's out. So just so you know, sticks with boots on, that is my friend Nikki's way of describing musical notation, and I love it. So that's that. Anyway, this episode, this YouTube version, we don't put music in it. So if you want to hear Austin's absolutely fantastic music for Aliens Fireteam Elite within this conversation, you need to listen to the audio podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That'd be fabulous. Please join us on Discord. It's free. The link is in the show notes to join the Level with Emily Discord server. There are all kinds of fun, different channels and ways for you to share your thoughts about episodes or what game you're playing or what soundtrack you wish would be on Level, all kinds of things in the Discord channel. So be sure to check us out there. And also join us on Patreon if you're able to support us financially. That's how to do it. Visit patreon.com/level. All right. Always fabulous to have Austin Wintory on Level. And here's just another great example of that. Here's Austin Wintory.
The kind of broad description of the game, irrespective of any musical discussion, is that it's an online co-op shooter. It is very much Aliens, and therefore a kind of successor to the legacy of James Cameron in the second film, not to be confused with Ridley Scott and the kind of ultra moody, atmospheric suspense horror of Alien. In so many ways, if the game that Creative Assembly did a few years ago, Alien Isolation, is very clearly a descendant of the Ridley Scott film, you know, our conscientious differentiation was, no, this is an action game. This is, and not just an action game, it's a, you know, colonial marine squad shooter. You play with friends. You know, it's a very different beast. It is narratively driven. The campaign does follow story beats, and there's even like novelization tie-ins and all kinds of fun bits. So it's not like it dismisses the importance of telling a story, but it places the, you know, over-the-shoulder third-person action gameplay front and center, and it's fun. It's one of those games that I was just thinking about this earlier, that I've been very lucky to work on games that are varyingly, you know, either you could think of them as experimental or you could think of them as trying to just, whether experimental is too loaded of a term in the vein of, like, say, avant-garde, it's fair to nonetheless call a lot of the games I've worked on trying to push where the current fences are on what we think of games as being. I've been very lucky to work on a bunch of games like that, not least of which Journey obviously really kind of challenged these notions. And what I have found so wonderful about this is it's kind of like one of the few games that I've done that has this utterly unpretentious desire to just be fun in the traditional kind of old-fashioned, almost arcade sense of video games.
Yeah.
And that's now, and I say that as non-reductively as I can possibly be, because to me that's a wonderful achievement. To be just viscerally fun is just as difficult as to be this kind of probing, meditative, interesting thing as a Journey or an Abzu. Like they're fundamentally different challenges. And so, even though there's plenty of things to kind of get all excited about in the sort of artsy end of the spectrum, even with this game, it really was just so fun to work on a thing where so many of the design decisions were just, is this cool? Will people just like this? Will this be fun for them? And like the team always had that front and center, which I found very healthy and it yielded great results. I really like the game. It's done well. It has sustained an audience. It's actually crazy. It's been out now a solid year.
Yeah.
And people still. I mean, the fact that the album only came out today, while we're hours before we are recording this, and people seem excited. I'm actually getting very positive reaction on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. And for a thing that's technically a year old, I kind of thought, there might be a little bit of I forgot about that. Like, but it's the game seems to have actually sort of sustained its player base and all that kind of thing. So anyway, somewhere in there was the answer to what is the game. There you go.
I think people have said it's fun. I've heard it compared numerous times to Left 4 Dead, which is kind of the epitome of fun squad killing, right? I mean, it's like, of course that's fun, and to get to shoot a bunch of xenomorphs is fun as well.
Left 4 Dead was for sure one of the kind of big, obvious sort of genre staples to look at, and became an interesting case study. Because a lot of games like that tilt towards a very subtle musical approach, and very understandably, because you're competing not only with the game's sounds, which the players are relying on to facilitate playing the game, but they're also usually talking to each other over Discord or whatever. And so it's like, we best to err on that kind of more understated, less is more approach. And so it was fun that Cold Iron, the developer, were very, unapologetically like, let's just go for it. Like, if players turn down the music because they want to talk to each other, like, let them make that call. But let's just offer up this idealized vision of what we think an Aliens thing ought to be, which, especially Aliens, is pretty bombastic and full of carnage and madness. And so, even despite being a squad shooter, we definitely went the opposite road of in terms of just visceralness. Yeah. And I say that with nothing but admiration. I did a chat with Martin Stee Anderson regarding the new not Left 4 Dead, but the kind of latest. Why am I blanking? Back 4 Blood, which again they came out right on top of each other as kind of similar games conceptually, but sort of opposite scores in so many ways.
Yeah,
which was a fun contrast.
Yeah. I mean, the Alien and Aliens, all of those stories are definitely have a solid place in the world of sci-fi. Like, I mean, these are some of the first movies that I would consider kind of scary, almost horror, that I watched and loved. I mean, because I was a person who was very not into scary movies, but I love these films. And part of the reason I love them is because the scores are so great. And I mean, the composers that have worked on these films were legends, with obviously Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner, R.I.P. to both of those fine fellas, and Elliot Goldenthal. And, it's clear listening to your music that these were sources of musical inspiration as well, or that you kind of wanted to stay in that world. So I love these kind of the blending of this more actiony kind of environment, but also you have these opportunities to have these kind of slower, sparse, melodic, atonally so, but melodic and lush and beautiful, even though crunchy and dissonant. And so I mean, I just loved all the contrast in the score. So now let's talk about your music, man. It's really great.
Well, that's really kind, and you're absolutely dead on the money that Goldsmith kind of is my reigning champion, sort of amongst all composers. It's just always been my absolute top of the heap, diehard, fan and believer in his work, and Alien is one of many career highlights. And so, the opportunity to kind of pay a little bit of an intentional homage was fun, because as passionate as I am about him, the thing I've always found, the thing that I would hopefully say is most influential about him on me, was more his philosophy of trying to kind of reinvent himself each time, and of getting under the skin of a project to find something that he had never personally tried before, and that hopefully brought something out of that film that you wouldn't have gotten through the actors, the script, the cinematography. That he found a way to let the music give voice to some subtextual idea that could only have come through that way, this sort of emotional underpinning. And he had just an uncanny knack for that, and to be able to write such psychoanalytically deep music, which was also itself somehow totally new and reinvented time and again. I mean, it's hard to understate the level of genius I think that requires. And as is commonly mentioned about Goldsmith, sadly he applied that genius to overwhelmingly kind of mediocre or even bad movies. So Alien is a special one because it's one of the few actually really great kind of classics that he scored, where the movie has really kind of been one of the ones to sustain his legacy. And so I mean, they even quote his score in Alien Isolation, which was amazing. I never thought I'd play a video game that had Jerry Goldsmith music in it, and that was amazing. I just loved that. It was subtle, but it was unmissable. So yeah, I knew I had to kind of wrap Goldsmith in beyond the philosophical admiration I have for him. This was one of those times where I thought, okay, no, I really do want to make an explicit musical gesture here. But separate from that, Horner's Aliens, and also, I'm glad you mentioned Goldenthal. To me, Goldenthal is maybe one of the greatest living composers that there is. I mean, he's right there. I think his bag of tricks may not be quite as wide as Goldsmith's, but his bag of tricks is quite spectacular regardless of that. And whether it's something as delicate as Frida, which is sort of anomalous in his output, or just one of many of these just unhinged, completely almost psychotically brilliant scores like Titus or Interview with the Vampire or I was one of the few people that both admired Uematsu's Final Fantasy, and I thought Goldenthal wrote this just towering achievement of a score. I remember him getting a lot of hate because everybody was like, if it's not Uematsu, it's useless. And I thought, this is Elliot Goldenthal. I mean, my God, the guy wrote Interview with the Vampire in like 13 days or something like that and got an Oscar nomination. And it's still to this day one of the most awesome kind of gothic horror scores ever written. Mm-hmm. And Michael Collins is maybe my favorite score he's ever written. It just goes on and on and on. The guy's amazing.
Yeah.
And Alien 3 was one of his first scores. It was Fincher's first real movie. And even though a lot of the people involved with it tend to disavow it, the score is full of such creative ways to be unsettling and full of such just like where you hear these sounds and you go, I don't know how they made that sound, especially in those days. Like I could kind of imagining all our modern plugins and Pro Tools and sample libraries. I could imagine somebody doing that now a little bit more readily, but back then, you know, just the sheer imagination of it. So the goal was, okay, you know, how do I ingest all that consciously, knowing that there's like a franchise that will, there's like a not just a franchise. What I mean is there's fans of this franchise, including myself, who would recognize those gestures that would see the thing they love reflected in the work. You want to make sure to do that. But I'm really staunchly opposed to the increasingly common, like as South Park put it, the member berries kind of trend to lazily just sort of rehash old ideas. Yeah. And you know, kind of leverage the nostalgia as the dopamine hit, you know, and not really try to have the courage, as it were, to try something new, knowing that, you know, if it's a beloved franchise, you have to just accept the odds that your work is probably not going to live up to the thing that people have loved for 40 years. And that just comes with the territory of signing on the dotted line. But to try to outmaneuver that by lazily repurposing the work of, you know, arguably greater creatives than oneself is not the way to go. So I thought, okay, and so lucky to have the game developer 100% behind me on this, where I said, I want to pay homage to Goldsmith and Horner. You know, we're going to have our Marshall snare drums. You know, that's like such the telltale sign of Aliens. It's just nonstop colonial marine drum corps kind of stuff. So we're going to go all in on that. But I really want to try to go places that I feel like none of these other scores went. And, you know, some people will like it, some won't. And I've seen people as recently as today go, yeah, this isn't really Alien music. And then I've also seen people as recently as today say, you know, my greatest hope was that they said, you know, this felt like you took Aliens and then went somewhere with it, where you, it's like a child. It's like Aliens had like a secret soiree and birthed a child that we never knew about. So you can like see the genetic markers of the familiar parent, but yet there's like another parent that you never knew about that is in the equation, you know, a kind of tryst that yielded this other child, where, you know, it's got the familiar and the unfamiliar. That was the goal. And some people see, in general, actually, I feel like I've been very lovingly treated by the various kind of like online fandoms. Like there's various Aliens subreddits and stuff that are full of people, you know, who way before the game and long after the game are talking about Aliens because they love Aliens all day. And I've seen like people say really nice things about the score and the kind of some of the really weird choices that were made for it. And so I'm really grateful that it wasn't just dismissed out of hand for being different, you know?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, from the very opening track, you can listen to it and hear that world. And that's really fantastic. And I love too, the really, you know, less obvious ways that you pay homage, maybe through instrumentation or like using the didgeridoo, right? Or, you know, that just made me smile. And I love the things that you did with electric bass. The oboe stuff is absolutely gorgeous. Of course.
I don't know how to write music without Kristen.
Right? I mean,
you know,
she's brilliant.
Truly.
And then we have to talk about the fact that, you know, was it Goldsmith that used Serpent?
Yep. He had two of them playing together.
The instrument, the Serpent, and the Zaffoon. No one used that. That was new, right? This was your addition, was the Zaffoon. So we have to talk about the freaking Zaffoon.
Yeah, so that one is, that's, again, you know, credit to Kristen, who she's like this musical soulmate. I just don't know. You know, it's funny. We first met the better part of 10 years ago when she did a cover on English horn of Journey's theme Nascence and put it up on her YouTube channel. And I remember thinking, she has she ticks every box here because it was gorgeous playing. It was well recorded, especially considering like it was a living room, home recording kind of situation. And that was way less common from, this is way pre-pandemic where musicians weren't assumed to know how to engineer themselves.
Right.
Nowadays, pretty much every musician realized they have to be able to do that because sessions can get canceled at the drop of a hat when, the wrong person tests positive for COVID, and, an 80-piece orchestra will be dismissed like it. So we live in a much more volatile world, even as we kind of increasingly dare to regard the pandemic in the rearview mirror, or at least the most severe version of the pandemic. There's still a volatility to things that it introduced that has required musicians to all get on board with this. And she was so ahead of the curve on this subject. I think just as a natural product of living in Orlando, hardly a recording hub. So she just said, well, if I want to participate in this, I better do it myself. I love the kind of entrepreneurial spirit of that. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. And so she engineered it, she mixed it. It all sounded fantastic. It was great playing. And I also just admired the kind of, I'm just going to do this nature, the kind of almost gumption of it. The hilarious thing is I discovered years later, when Journey came out, I remember I got my inbox kind of exploded. And I discovered years later that she had reached out to me to ask for permission to do that. And I never even saw her email. And so she did it anyway, which I love. She was like, the asking for permission was just kind of this novelty, like this sort of going through the motions, but then in the end didn't really care if I was going to offer permission or not. So of course I couldn't resist when I discovered that email like 5 years later to write back then and go, you know what? Okay, go ahead. Because it was that video that made me call her and say, I'd love to make the oboe the featured instrument of Abzu, and would you be willing to record it? And that began our relationship. We worked on Abzu on and off for several years. It came out in 2016. And then I think I've maybe written one or two things maybe that I haven't featured her on because the thing is she plays everything. So it's like there's just no one of these days she's going to get bored of winds and call me and say, by the way, I also play violin and viola and marimba and tuba and I'm just waiting for the day. But in the meantime, we've developed a fun pattern of identifying interesting instruments that she doesn't own, and like I'll order it or she'll order it or whatever, and I'll say, you've got a month, get ready. We're going to start using this.
Get ready.
And I don't remember when she first brought up this Zephoon. Of course, I had never heard of it. It's a bizarre. It's like an instrument that shouldn't exist. It's got this horrible sound. It's kind of like when you hear bassoon players and oboe players like warming up the reed with the mouthpiece detached, and it's like this honking, just ugly. And it's like if you just do that in a way where you can actually play notes, but it's that color, it's basically that. And so it was like, we got to use this. This if we're in a world where you need, serpent and didgeridoo and other kind of otherworldly sounds. Very much the Goldsmith side of the equation. Horner's score is far more straight ahead with the use of the orchestra. Goldsmith and Goldenthal, of course. Goldenthal was more like musical sound design in a way, but Jerry using these odd instrumental combinations and even there's things, as a little aside, one of the things that I really love about Goldsmith's score is he uses the big orchestral chimes, like the kind of orchestral bells a lot in his score.
Yeah.
And that was one of the ways that I said, that's a sound. I always like those, but you use them sparingly because a little bit of that goes a long way. But he uses them a bit unapologetically in the really aggressive moments where you just hear this, there's this great face hugger sequence in the original Alien where the orchestra's doing this, and every time he has this little kind of, you hear them clang, striking the bell. And I thought, I gotta use that gesture as one of my little Goldsmith-isms that most people won't know that's where this is coming from. But I can't not, because it makes it feel like Alien to me in a way that's not ripping off something, more obvious, like a melody or whatever, or like it felt, I don't know, it felt subtle. It felt the right degree of subtle. And so, yeah, this Zaphoon was in that same vein of a sound that if he'd known about it, he probably would have used it. It's that kind of thing. And probably the ultimate culmination of our relationship to the Zaphoon was, this website Cameo?
No.
Where, so Cameo, if you go on there, it's basically a bunch of celebrities that if, you give them anywhere from $20 to like $200, they'll record like a selfie for you or that you can have or gift to a friend or whatever. And so, it's a pretty cool thing. I have a few actor friends that, it's like especially in the pandemic when, a lot of work stopped and whatnot, it provided a great income opportunity, especially for those that would normally be doing Comic Cons, signing
Sure.
photos or prints and things like that, or doing selfies with folks after a Q&A or those kinds of things. It gave them a way to kind of connect with their audience and still kind of earn the income that they would have otherwise earned. And so one day I happened to see that Kenny G was doing Cameo. So as a gift for Kristen, I got him. When you buy it, it'll say, "Do you want them to? If this is a gift for someone, do you want them to say something specific?"
Yeah.
And so I got Kenny G to say, "Kristen, I want you to know I'm gonna learn the Zaphoon," and it was basically my life's greatest work.
Yes.
And I felt I could contentedly retire as a member of public life.
It's wonderful.
And just disappear into a cabin in the woods after that, because I'm never going to top Kenny G. If only there was some I could like follow up and actually see him playing one. That would be the only way to one up that. But
right, you gotta wonder if he like Google searched it and bought one on Amazon or something. After
exactly.
Finished that.
One can dream that is what happened. But in any case, so that was one, and it was actually especially cool on this one to use because we also would pitch it down an octave through not through normal pitch shifting, but through a kind of like octavizer guitar pedal where it's a very unsteady shift. So it's kind of, you hear it jittering like it's trying to play back the pitch that she actually recorded at. So it's instead of doing this da 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 da, it's kind of this da 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 da, it's kind of shaking, which just makes it already a kind of unpleasant tone color that much jankier. It was so much fun. It was so great to have an excuse to get this weird and it basically be the right thing no matter what.
Yeah, it's a unique sound, and I liked it quite a bit.
Well,
also loved all
your attention to these details. It's fun.
Of course, the low brass, man. I mean, the low brass through this is so great, and I love even like in one of the videos that you have on your very vibrant and vivacious YouTube channel includes a little bit of the recording session, and there's like 9,000 trombones in one room, which I love. Clearly not 9,000, but a big room full of
just
low brass,
shy of that,
8,000. Yeah, 8,000.
Yeah, it was one of those where, because we were in the pandemic, there was real caps on how big a group you could fit into the room, and I'm always looking for how do we lean into our situation to make an interesting result out of whatever card we're dealt. That's I've always admired. When a score or when any project, whether it's a score or otherwise, it's usually budget that drives this kind of thing where you go, okay, well, we can't afford, the London Symphony. So what can we use that is such an interesting choice that it doesn't actually make you ever think about the London Symphony? You don't find yourself going, that sounds cool and upholds your MIDI elements elsewhere or whatnot, but it would have been really cool if you'd been able to do it properly. It's like a well executed score. If it's even just banging two sticks together, if you commit to that, hopefully that's in the end all that it needs, and you don't find yourself thinking, oh, where's the rest? I like it should just. I remember a friend once messaged me after listening to the Banner Saga. He was like, I've been listening to this score for a week, and it only just occurred to me there aren't any strings anywhere in this score. It's all winds and brass. Yeah. And it was like, that's the best review I could possibly get, because the idea was to commit to this aesthetic such that you don't ever find your imagination thinking about the things it's not. Yeah. And so yeah, this one, the pandemic, I mean, the game, I have nothing but positive things to say about Cold Iron, and I was hired by Disney, and then in the middle of working on it, Disney got acquired by Fox. So the people I was working for by the end of the game was Disney, but it was definitely Fox at the beginning of it as the holder of the IP of the 20th Century Fox was the studio that released Alien and Aliens, and obviously, and the whole franchise. So across the board, everyone I worked with was fantastic. We didn't have unlimited budget by any stretch, though, so I had to be a bit creative with how I used the money to begin with. But then the pandemic added an extra wrinkle to that, because I had started well before the pandemic, and then that was like a midstream adjustment we had to make. Okay. And so it was, okay, well, what kind of forces can be recorded safely and give exactly the sound we're going for? So then, yes, it became this, sort of like half dozen trombones and, combination of tenor and bass trombones playing discrete parts. So I could make these real thick chords and things. And, and then also two tubas, because who double chimbasso, so that if we really want a very beefy brass sound, we can get it. But I actually barely use the chimbasso because, again, tuba is actually fairly prominent in Goldsmith's Alien. And I thought, it's such an underused sound, especially outside of the kind of noble brass chorale. You think of like John Williams' Hymn to the Fallen from Saving Private Ryan, and that kind of warm, lush brass where the tuba is the glue that holds the whole thing together, and you can't possibly pull off that kind of like funeral sound or noble kind of stately, regal sound. You couldn't do it without tuba. But tuba is an underestimated force of nature in a more kinetic environment. And one of my favorite examples is actually also John Williams, is the Battle of Hoth from Empire Strikes Back, where he's got this, boom, boom, this melody, this recurring motif through that's prominently carried by tuba. And it's freaking awesome. And so Goldsmith also uses it in Alien a few years before Empire Strikes Back. 1 year before. Just in some of these, like the sequence where the classic sequence where, they're in the air duct and they're looking at the lights blinking and they're looking around. They don't see him. I don't see him. It's coming right behind you. All that kind of that classic Alien, terrifying sequence. There's, tubas plays kind of an outsized role. At least it always, to me, felt like he was kind of featuring it in a way beyond its generic kind of low pedal point type roles. And so, let's see if we can kind of one up that a bit with two of them, where we can write 2-part tuba lines, which I had also done a fair bit on the Banner Saga and just absolutely love doing. I love the sound of two tubas moving independently. It's just such a glare. I just did a Netflix series where I took it to another level. We had 4 tubas, and that was the only brass. And it was so much fun. And I never get tired of that color. It's so underappreciated. And so I needed 2 tubas, and then the only other rest of the orchestra, a conventional orchestra in that sense, was 2 pairs of cello, like pods. I kind of thought of them as, where I had cello group 1 on the left side of the room and cello group 2 on the right side of the room, doing a kind of call and response with one another, as instead of like violin 1 and 2, it was cello 1 and 2, and also no bass or violin or viola to speak of.
The cellos really lose their minds in the 5th track. Now, when I had a chance to review the soundtrack, there weren't any track names, so I only know them by number.
No problem.
At this time, but when we put it in the playlist, I'll have the names in the playlist itself. But for the purpose of this, track 5, the cellos go crazy, and I love that. And I love how you're pushing them to the limit of their range, and it adds to tension, right? When you're hearing an instrument strain in a way. I mean, they're professionals, so they're probably not actually straining, but the instrument sounds like it is, right? And I love how unsettling that is. Talk to me about that.
Oh, you absolutely nail the intent behind it. The goal is always, I remember there was Benjamin Zander, the conductor, most famously associated with Boston, gave a great TED talk like 15 years ago. One of the first TED talks I ever saw, where he referred to what he called single cheek music, which is music that makes the musician literally lean forward in their chair, kind of half off their ass. Because they realize, I really need to pay attention to this, and I've always tried to I'm always constantly kind of trying to educate myself on every instrument I write for, whether it's the rank and file members of the orchestra that I've written for countless times to the Zaffoon or anything else that I'm far less accustomed to. The goal is always a kind of continuous education where I can really learn how to write parts that are they're not unnatural to the instrument, but they might be challenging. In the goal being to challenge the musician enough that it's like a good personal trainer who says, just 5 more reps. I know you can do it. And it's not that they're being put in a physically compromising or unsafe situation or anything like that. It's just that, if they didn't have that trainer, they might have stopped 5 reps earlier. The goal is it's a weird analogy, but the goal is, to kind of write a thing that makes them lean forward and go, okay, this is definitely playable, but just give us a take or two to kind of get it into our system before we can then kind of take it apart. And I remember once, there's a fantastic musician here in LA that plays on all the big sessions, named Heather Clark. She's a flute player. She's one of the principals in John Williams' roster. She had very prominent credited featured solos in his score to the Big Friendly Giant of Spielberg's from a few years ago. And she's been featured on a bunch of my scores. And she's a true, just ferociously talented flute player. And I remember doing a session with her years ago, and I always love asking about the session musician's perspective working with various composers. Yeah. And I had just listened to maybe one of the Ice Age scores or Happy Feet or something of John Powell's. And, he has such a gift for these absolute just fireworks shows within the orchestra. And I asked her, as a flute player in particular, I'm very curious your experience of playing for John Powell, because she's played on 1 million of his scores. And she said something that has stuck with me forever, that has become my mantra, that's become my goal. She goes, John has an uncanny ability to write like 4 BPM lower than what would be unplayable. And so this idea that it is playable, and we're like high-fiving when we nail it because it's so difficult, but it's not difficult for the bad reasons. It's not difficult because you don't know how to write for flute. That's always the challenge that composers fall into is, did I write a thing that is unnecessarily difficult? Like, did I put this in a key that the fingerings very inorganically are going to map to? I totally was guilty of this. Last year I had a session here in town on the Fox stage where I had been writing for the Hardanger fiddle as an overdub, which is a beautiful instrument that has these sympathetic strings. So it's essentially an 8-string violin, but the 4 of those 8 strings are purely sympathetic vibration, and they're tuned in a way that you can't really retune them without essentially taking apart the whole instrument. So what that means is if you want to get the full benefit of those those sympathetic strings, you have to place the instrument in one of very few keys that the overtone series is going to mesh with. So, sure. That means basically the maximum amount of sympathetic vibration that you're going to get is relationships in octaves and fifths and fourths. Mm-hmm. And the strings of the Hardanger fiddle mean that keys like A major and E major and their counterparts are going to be where that fiddle sounds the most like the Hardanger fiddle and doesn't just sound like a normal violin. Because if I wrote a Hardanger fiddle part in B flat, Rachel, in the case of the musician I like to use, is a Hardanger fiddle specialist up in the Pacific Northwest. She could play in B flat. It's not like it's any different from a normal violin in terms of what keys it could play in. But if you wanted to actually lean into what makes it special, you have to engage with its own idiosyncrasies. Yeah. So I wrote this piece the result was it kind of forced my hand, and I wrote this piece in G sharp minor, which on the face of it, it sort of sounds intimidating, but it's actually really not so bad. It's just a little uncommon, so some of the fingerings might be a little bit like, I haven't kind of played this particular succession of notes as recently as certain other keys, but all the musicians, especially a kind of LA orchestra, everyone can handle it. But I had put in these really fast bassoon runs where there's, that in a key like, say, B flat or G minor or C minor would be not trivially easy, but very natural on bassoon with the natural layout, the natural inclination. But subjecting them to G sharp minor, because the Hardanger fiddle had forced me into that, I made the mistake of essentially just writing a part like I would have written in a different key, and putting it in this one. And I remember Anthony Parnthry, the principal bassoon, one of the great musicians here in LA and phenomenal conductor in his own right. I remember I was like, how you doing back there? And, shouting across the whole orchestra. And he was just like, I don't remember what he said, but in typical Anthony fashion, something along the lines of enjoying the fact that there's only 18 minutes until the session's over or something like that. I definitely was torturing the bassoons in a way that was actually not ideal. Like their suffering was not the good kind. It was me, sort of falling into the trap of thinking all keys are created equal in the hands of a great musician, and no matter how great they are, and he's world class, undoubtedly one of the best living bassoonists. Could there be no question? Yeah. It's just the demands placed on it are the instrument doesn't want to do that, and so that to me, I know this is all super tangential off the dimension of the cello, but that the goal is always, this is where I'm working with someone like Tina Guo on a regular basis, or another great cellist, Ro Rowan, who can do basically anything. They let you constantly figure out where are those boundaries where this is hard because it's challenging, but fundamentally doable, versus this is hard because you're not a cellist. And you just wouldn't have written this if you knew what you were doing. And so I'm always trying to kind of be a proxy cellist as well as I can. And it's absolutely, I always ask the musicians afterward, especially on a session like this where it's full of pretty challenging writing, how do you feel about today? Was this good? I really do want your feedback. And in general, everybody seemed to, really have fun. And one of those rock star Nashville cellists tweeted at me just an hour ago or whatever with the release of the soundtrack to say this was a good day. We really had fun with it. And that really means a lot to me because work really hard to make it fun for them. A lot of scores are very boring, because you just need pads and things. And so it's like the goal is to make them to walk home feeling exhausted and satisfied. Like a good day at work. Like, this is why I do this. Like, it's very lofty. We probably very rarely, if ever, achieve that level of like, this is why I learned the cello. But if you can come within even striking distance of reminding them that this can be really artful and challenging and fun, and then I consider that part of my job, part of my goal.
Yeah. You bringing up something reminded me of something I meant to say about the tubas, which I feel like I heard some tuba rips, like ripping up the up the just harmonic series of what a tuba can do, and that was definitely really fun too. Yeah.
Again, they are tubas. Tubas can practically play the full horn range. Like they're so under and up high. They're a shockingly beautiful lyrical instrument, and then down low they can be. It's a different color because obviously it's a different construction from they're more like giant French horns than they are like trombones. They're acoustically almost identical to the horn. There's just more tubing, so they can go lower. But they are fundamentally built with that same kind of design conceit, or very, very similar to it. So they have a very round sound, and sort of their default position is a relatively slow attack, much like the horn. There's a bloom to their pitch relative to the kind of instantaneous nature of the trombone, which is why, of course, the chimbasso, the sort of trombone version of the tuba, has become so popular in Hollywood circles. Salute, because they give you that bottom range. They give you the full range of what the tuba could do, all the way to the bottom of sound. But with the color and the attack of a trombone. But I always say, don't discount how ferocious they can be, though, just because they're so associated with that warmth and that kind of pillowy quality. They are not to be seen as, sort of gentle giants only, and with the rips and all the other kind of weird pitch bends, and and it's fun to push the musicians to that, because they're always left out of all those fun sessions, they weird, because we did some sampling of just effects and things and crescendos of wild sounds and things that I could, find ways to build, like to then, mangle in an audio post-processing way to make weird sounds from. And so I needed things independent from what was written, in the score. We had a kind of separate sampling session as part of the recording process to just get some effects and additional things with that particular lineup of sounds, the cello and the low brass. And so they got to have a little bit of fun that they're hopefully not so accustomed to that day.
Yeah, that stuff was great. Also, just continuing with the low end of the palette of instruments in the world, we had a lot of electric bass in there. And by we, I mean you, of course. So talk to me about that choice, bringing in electric bass and all the fun distortion and cool things that instrument does.
Yeah, the game is broken into campaigns, and campaign 3 introduced some new, some like totally new enemy types, some new kind of types of aliens that are new to the franchise. Like the studio got to kind of create their own additions to the franchise, and it clearly lent itself in a way to fundamentally new colors that are not as common now. This is where the Goldenthal is kind of the closest comparison, because he also just kind of goes off the rails a bit. And I wanted that feel. I wanted it to kind of think, oh, this is just kind of gnarly. Some of my earliest experiments, I kind of went a little metal with it. And I remember they said, we're starting to kind of like feel the gravity of doom. And sort of the towering long shadow cast by Mick Gordon, and I most certainly, not only is that not really alien at that point, but I would dare not invite myself to comparison to Mick Gordon. He's just so unbelievably excellent, and but I thought there is something to the kind of kinetic energy though of that. And so Tom Straley, my who I work with just as constantly and joyously as Kristen, the two of them are really the two most constant collaborators in my life. Called up Tom and we had a discussion about creating a kind of hybrid sound by layering electric bass with baritone guitar, acoustic baritone guitar, and electric baritone guitar. So you end up with usually around 4 to 6 simultaneous. He tracked the part 6 times on these various instruments, where he would track it on baritone down an octave, and then like electric baritone with a pedal, an octavizer pedal that's pulling it down an octave, and on acoustic. One of the things that was cool was the acoustic baritone. There's a bunch of places where we tracked it, and I literally just dropped it in with zero anything. There's no reverb added. There's no EQ. It's just raw. It's just literally the mic directly into the mix and leave it, because it had such a kind of crispy little sound that it added. And then it's kind of like you hear the attack of the unadorned baritone just doing the boom, like that instant speaking of a plucked string that happens. You know, just there's no delay in the sound. And then the sort of sustain is carried by all the electric contributors to it. So you get this very precise sounding attack and this warbly, weird, distorted sustain as a result. And it ended up being a wonderful kind of blend that he helped me find. And then another ingredient to that as well was something I've gotten in the habit of doing, is that I've done now sort of 3 projects in a row, and I plan to just kind of continue forever, is I've been doing these contests where, like when I remember it all started with the game I did, Erica, where Erica was going to be announced and released on the same day, which was a rare thing. Like no trailer, no, it was just like they Jack Attridge, the director, and the lead actress Holly Earl went on stage with Jeff Keighley at Gamescom and just said, "Here's our game, available now on the PlayStation Store." And so I thought, well, I would like to find some way to kind of tease that there's a score that I was really grateful to be part of. I loved working on that game. It's such a cool game. And I wanted to kind of hint that there was something cool coming, but I obviously couldn't mention anything because the game was totally unannounced. So I put the theme, I basically did like a 1-finger version of the theme, like literally just here's a melody with there's no harmonies, and I just put it as, here's a sheet music as just treble clef, no indication of instrumentation, and here's a recording of me plunking it literally one note at a time on piano, but with nothing intended about the piano itself. It's just a means to an end to hear this melody. And so I said, I won't tell anybody how I treated this melody, how I arranged it, nor even what it's from. And 2 weeks before the game came out, I just released that, and I said, I want to hear people's take on this melody with zero context. And, I'll find some takes that I find interesting. There's no direction to this. It's not, I want to hear the best orchestra or the best this or the best that. Just do whatever your imagination tells you. I will find some entries that strike me as interesting, and I'll find a way to work together on whatever next thing comes along. And so then I got all these amazing covers of that theme that were just totally unlike anything I had done, and a few that were shockingly alike what I had done. And then brought in those people to work with me on the Pathless. Then when it came time to release the Pathless, I released a video of, here's who I picked from Erica, here's what they did, and now here's the new challenge. And I released a stem of audio of one of the nickel harpa bits from Pathless of just like, here's just a stem from a mix, do whatever you want. And so some people put accompaniment to it, some people stretched it and made drones and crazy, and I got a lot of interesting. So then I pulled 4 people from that to work with me on Aliens Fireteam. And when Fireteam came out, I released a new video of here's the winners I chose, and stay tuned for the next contest. So one of the guys was this guy named Mikey Parsons, who I sent Tom's guitar tracks to, and I basically said he had done this absolute bizarre, almost like parody of the Pathless. Like he went in such a ballsy, weird direction that I couldn't not hire him, because I just thought everybody looked. It's kind of like, you remember the Westworld Spitfire competition did you see that a couple years ago so the sample library company Spitfire that does all the VSTs, they work with Hans Zimmer and all these other folks and release really high-end sample libraries. They teamed up with Ramin Djawadi and J.J. Abrams and the Nolans on the show Westworld, and did a rescore this scene, and we'll pick a winner, and they'll get basically every Spitfire library we've ever released as a prize. Nice. And there were like 10,000 entries, and it was this whole big thing. I mean, thousands and thousands of composers. And the one they picked because he went super hard left field where it's a lot of them, as you could imagine, were basically like second-rate Ramin or second-rate Hans Zimmer, where they're very remote control, very, big toms and taiko drums and French horns, kind of orchestra, epic, blah, 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 because it's like a car chase sequence.
Okay.
And the grand prize winner, he builds and builds and builds, and then he goes into full-blown like 8-bit chiptunes. And it was just so courageous that
that's one word for it.
Oh, and of course it caused people. You go on forums and there's people that are like, "I'm never buying Spitfire again." La, la, la. They were so upset. I mean, it was like our version of the premiere of Rite of Spring. It was like, what is the like 21st century? Everyone's at home during the pandemic and losing their mind version of that. Actually, might have even been before the pandemic. But either way, half the internet applauded him. I was definitely in that half. The other half thought it artistically invalidated. It was one of those we're not friends anymore moment for a lot of people. It was so ridiculous. But I loved it. And so this guy, Mikey Parsons, his was like that. It was such a, it wasn't 8-bit chiptunes, but what I mean is his interpretation of the prompt of my little contest was so left field that I thought, I don't know what this guy's going to do. And that's exciting. So I remember I just sent him a bunch of Tom's baritone guitar tracks and I said, here's kind of what I'm already doing with them. But I want you to be the X factor and just play with these stems, and I will mix in there whatever you do. I'll find a way to kind of mix it with what I'm doing. And so there's a lot of these kind of odd flutters and weird colors to the sound that are very much his contribution, where I didn't tell him how to affect it. I just said, here's your kind of, within the cue, there's a portion of it that is built around this instrument. Here are the raw recordings, and just go nuts. And he absolutely delivered. And so it has a unique quality where credit where it's due to his contribution there as well.
Yeah. And what's his name?
Mikey Parsons.
Mikey Parsons is what you said. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. Wow. The YouTube video that I if you look up my Aliens contest, YouTube video, I invited each of the 4 winners. I had them film themselves describing their entry and then what they did for Fireteam, so that you could see what they did, to be one of the winners that I chose before, and then here's how they kind of applied that to this score.
Cool. Yeah. One of the other things I really liked was, and you referenced it earlier, how in Aliens, which of course is the second movie that James Horner scored, lots of Marshall snare drums, percussion, because they are Marines up in space, right? And so
absolutely.
I really loved all the percussive things you did, and of course it obviously wasn't limited to snare. So I would love to hear you talk about some of the more unique things that you recorded and used as percussive devices.
I mean, there's definitely, there's a lot of percussion, and the snare was one of those where, because that's such a sound. In fact, if memory serves, Horner had like 2 weeks or something absolutely insane to turn around Aliens. I mean, he scored it, as a very, very last second. The movie was way behind schedule, and they brought him in, and he basically just had to vomit out this score. And I remember, if memory serves, Cameron responded to the snare so much that he essentially, like, when you listen to the score and it's so prominent in the mix, that was apparently Cameron's doing, and Horner was not actually very happy with that, if memory serves.
Okay.
That is itself a little kind of insight into the fact that Goldsmith hated working with Ridley Scott on Alien. Horner hated working with James Cameron on Aliens, and I assume that Goldenthal and Fincher got along well, but Fincher is so unhappy with Alien that he kind of disavows the whole thing, and he never worked with Goldenthal again that I know. So I kept joking, going, I love Matt Hyacin, the creative director, and Derek Reyes, our audio director, and the initial audio director who went to a different company shortly after he hired me, Michael Camper. Everyone that I worked with, I get along with great. I'm super grateful to them. Jared Yeager over at Fox, now Disney, who was responsible for the introduction, who introduced me. He's an old friend, and he's the one who introduced me to the developer. I kept saying, I don't know if this counts as a real Alien or Aliens project, because I'm having an awesome time, and you're all great to work with, and super, like, you challenge me, and you respect me, and you are excited when I do things, and then you give great feedback, and you push me directions that make it better. And I was like, all this is very off-brand, I'll have you know. And so yes, but Matt, much like James Cameron, said in one of our very first meetings, let's make sure that the snare drums, that's got to be a thing. Like, he said, how you do it.
Yeah.
I leave it to you to kind of work it in how you feel is right, but just know that is a valued notion here. And so that was one where, I wanted it to be real big and beefy. And so I basically combined recording real snare drum with layering it with several different sample libraries worth of snare ensemble. So you end up with just this kind of inhumanly large, aggressive Marshall drum corps kind of sound. The funny thing is, the way it works in game, this is a perfect example of where the album can be quite different from the in-game material, because the way it works in-game is the snares are basically omnipresent and selectively muted or unmuted, so that we would do things like, you trigger an engagement with, you move into a room and they go, all right, activate the radio to call the dropship, and then they'll be here in 1 minute, which, anybody who's played a game before knows, I'm going to hit this button and then I have 1 minute to survive because all hell is going to be coming at me.
Yeah.
And so it'll be one of those where, okay, you hit the button and the music starts. Maybe it's not 1 minute. Maybe it's slightly, there's a little bit of give and take. But there's for sure, like, one of the first missions is you have to wait for an elevator to arrive. And they're like, it's coming slowly, of course. Yeah. And so you're fighting at the entrance to this elevator shaft. And we would do a thing where I would have this absolutely just, bum ba da ba da bum ba bum bum ba bum ba da dum ba da dum ba da kind of snare drum part that spans the full cue, but it doesn't play the whole time. It waits for things like, how much, like, are you 50% through and there's only a little bit left, and we just want to kind of squeeze the rag that much harder to make the crescendo to the end a little bit more and add it in. Or maybe an engagement will start really strong and we have the snare drum in there that plays, and then if you're in that engagement long enough that the piece actually can loop, the snare won't loop with the rest of it, so that it gives your ear a break, because it's meant to kind of blow out the mix. Like, it's practically all you hear when it's in there, because again, it's so attached to the fabric of what makes Horner's Aliens what it is. But I said, you have to be able to kind of temper it to taste. Like, I want to be able to have it in when it's in a dynamic way that's driven by gameplay and by the player. So when it came time to do the album, that meant, okay, now I'm just going to subjectively kind of use it where I think it musically sounds best for an album cut, knowing that if you were to look at my audio editing in Pro Tools or whatever, you'd see a lot of muted snare, because otherwise it would just be an all snare album. I mean, it would be like, it may as well be the University of Southern California Drum Corps, with token appearances by other instruments.
Yeah.
So I mean, it really had the risk of coming off like that if I were to just leave those stems live, because it doesn't exist in game that way. In a way, the goal was to kind of recreate the way it comes and goes in the game, but in a way that's obviously fixed.
Right.
So Joris Hoogstetter did some overdubbing. We also did some cool sort of electronic drums where he had these drum pads where different areas of the drum pad can be mapped to different sounds. So it's not just an electric snare or something, like a sample of a snare. We created these sounds, like I recorded myself speaking, reciting the digits of pi and things like that, and he would map little fragments of those voices to different areas of the drum head, and then double the snare part, so you have this, bum, bada, bada, bum, and then he would layer that with this electric, like a sort of essentially like a synth drum, where you're hearing these fragments of like voice that you don't really hear it exactly, but there's something in there where you go, I don't really know what that is, but there's something in there beyond the snare. So we did a bit of that as well. So it was actually kind of like electronic percussion that he tracked as well. Yours. Wonderful musician who I work with a lot, who is always, much like Tom and Kristen, he's always such a valuable source of, well, we've never tried this before. What if we tried this? He's just so talented and so creative.
Yeah. Yeah. Is Pro Tools your DAW? Is that what you write in?
No, I write in Digital Performer.
Okay, because it didn't look like Pro Tools in your video, but I was unfamiliar with it. I used Digital Performer in 1995 as an undergrad. So yeah. It's been same. I started using it only a few years after that. I think 99 was the first time I tried it, and it's come a long way since then. And and I'm very at home with it. I've had a lot of friends over the years, move around all different DAWs, and it seems like DP is kind of the sort of the underdog of the DAW world. It seems like everybody prefers Cubase or Logic or even Reaper. And I think Brian Tyler may be the only composer I know of that actually uses Pro Tools as his DAW. But we always mix, my mix engineer, the stages always record in Pro Tools. So invariably, I have a pipeline. I work with a few folks where we've developed a really solid pipeline for essentially converting my DP files into Pro Tools sessions. Sure.
And then on a game like this, what I very often do, because I use Pro Tools, but I'm just so much faster in DP. That even though Pro Tools is probably better for audio editing, I'm actually faster at it in DP as well. So I very frequently, when I have to go to deliver the various stems and things that that Wise or Fmod is going to need for the game, I will frequently export everything back into DP from Pro Tools, but as now properly mixed stems, exactly as we got them to working with Steve Kempster, who is the mixer I use most frequently, and actually end the life of the cues in DP where they began. That's kind of the project. I didn't always used to do that. I used to always end in Pro Tools, and that was the end of it. But as the editorial needs have gotten more complex, just as I've pushed myself harder on the interactive music front, games like Erica and the Pathless and whatnot, where I'm really trying to kind of go places I've never personally been with interactive music, and which are hopefully kind of in general less explored in the world of games. It's just required so much editing that I can just do it faster in DP. And it's also nice to have all the MIDI data in line with it, because then I'm kind of always oriented on where I am. I'm not looking at waveforms. I'm actually editing based on the MIDI and then cleaning it up based on the waveform. Whereas in Pro Tools, you live a little bit more purely with the audio.
Yep, with the wave shape. And that's one of the things that's fun, too, about watching your videos that, again, I encourage everyone to look up on YouTube is these kind of behind-the-score videos where you're, sometimes it's the DAW that you're seeing, not the music itself, which is, I think, really helpful for people who can't read music, right? You're seeing shapes that aren't audio wave shapes.
Yeah, it's interesting how, kind of like we were saying with our sticks with boots on video. I knew I'd get us back there.
I know, it's legendary.
The sheet music videos that we do, and you were mentioning how even for folks that can't read music, they're kind of oddly watchable as almost a kind of almost like a odd form of like a visualizer, in Winamp, but one that's like a little bit more precise in what it's doing, and it's not random or kind of procedural. I think a piano roll in a DAW can have a similar quality. It kind of almost looks like Guitar Hero, where a bunch of short dots versus long held, that people kind of intuitively get what that means. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the folks at Harmonix who first started figuring out how do we visualize sheet music to a non-musician in developing, I wouldn't be surprised if the piano roll was actually explicitly their inspiration. I never thought about it till this moment. I've never asked them, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, because it is so intuitive that even though it actually is mapped to a kind of sideways verticalized view of a piano, you don't have to even be able to spot that to just get like, oh, a tight cluster of them together is clearly a cluster. Little sparse dots are going to be very pointillistic. Like, it's just It's just intuitive.
Yep.
Far more so than sheet music itself.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, I'm glad that you like those. It's very kind of you to shout that out. It's those are fun to make because they kind of let you do everything. They let me talk about the composition, but also the production and the different layers of sound and the different ways that different effects are achieved, whether through recording techniques or plugins or mix techniques or whatever, just to kind of say, here's how we got this sound, and hopefully someone can hear that, and hopefully it gives them an idea to take that and run with it and go come up with the next thing.
Yeah. Now, Austin, in addition to, obviously all the composition you work on all the time and, working on these videos, which I know you have help with that, but you're still doing it doing the work to make the video, right?
Just as a brief aside, my assistant Dallas, it's by law all people who in my office have to have Texas city names. We're currently taking interviews with Waco and El Paso and San Antonio for
Galveston.
Galveston. Galveston is a very useful part of the team. Dallas has been my assistant for a few years, and one of the reasons I hired him was that in addition to being a fully trained and qualified musician, he's a jazz trumpet player kind of in his origin story, but he's a composer who could, handle his own in any number of orchestral kind of context or whatever else. He's also, quick study and was fluent and savvy with things like Premiere, video editing, After Effects and creating animations and transitions and really kind of slick stuff. He's also a pretty talented visual artist. And so, creating custom fonts and all those kinds of things. It's one of those where he really appreciates, like, okay, we're doing a video about Alien. If you go back and watch the films, there's a very specific kind of low frame rate, grainy yellow quality to their video monitors and things. So it's like, those are the kinds of fonts. Can we find those fonts and can we duplicate them? And can we have that kind of aliased, like the kind of lines in the middle of the lettering and whatnot? And he's a nerd for that stuff and the typography. And so we can really create things that are artfully conceived, even if they're fundamentally a tutorial. So I couldn't do it without. I mean, we've made like 200 plus videos for my channel now, something
It's
like
amazing.
that. I mean, but just about once a week, sometimes multiple per week. And anyway, I since you mentioned it, I can't not shout him out as well as an invaluable member of the team and whose placement on my kind of broad team I hold with great gratitude, because he has a lot. But I cut you off to say that. I just couldn't not give him credit. I apologize, though. But
I'm grateful you did mention him, because, I mean, really, those videos are fantastic. He does really, really fine work. I wish I had just this much of his skills. I just do all my editing in iMovie, and I'm like, that's all I can handle right now. It's like...
Yeah, I tried that once, and I exactly one video on my channel is that, which is, if you go, there's a playlist of what I call raw session video, where I created the channel because I thought I can do these myself. This is long before I hired Dallas. If you look at the Assassin's Creed Syndicate raw session video, that was one I made myself in iMovie, and it was so tedious, even just that, so simple, that I thought, oh man, never again. Yeah. And I have to say also, it's not that I just turn him loose and then upload the video. We go back and forth, and I kind of direct these things very anally, and he deserves credit for his kind and patient implementation of what are sometimes like 8-page emails of, at 7 seconds and 9 frames, it really needs to do that, and like, giving me a whole new appreciation. In all seriousness, when I work on film and TV particularly, and the directors come with sometimes the most particular feedback, sitting in I don't want to call myself a director just because I direct him editing for my YouTube channel, but it's some cousin of directing. And it has given me a new appreciation for the feedback I'm getting from directors and seeing it through their lens. And I think it's actually made me a better film composer to sit in a quasi director's chair for these YouTube videos, and to really understand the parameters that you're playing with and the goal to try to just make it as good as it can be. Anyway, that's now twice that I've prevented you from actually saying what you were going to say.
Not at all. I just wondered if you're still doing your podcast too, on top of all of these other things.
Yeah, it's funny how doing a few, depending on how you frame it, I guess I have kind of 4 different podcasts of varying regularity now. We do this weekly show, Play, Watch, Listen, where we just kind of geek out about the game industry and pop culture in general, really,
and
or
that's
just
you
whatever
and Troy,
interests.
Right?
That's me and Troy and 2 others, a writer named Alana, and a game director named Mike. So it's kind of like the composer, the actor, the director, the writer talk about games. And we do that once a week on Alana Pierce is her name. She hosts that on her channel. And we just recorded this week our episode 116, I think. It was one of those where we've somehow managed to maintain a very nearly weekly pace, even though all of us have fairly complicated lives. And then Troy and I, just the 2 of us, do this series called You Gotta Hear This, where basically just nerd out about it's basically me saying, I can't sleep at night knowing you've never heard some random piece of music that I love, or a kind of curated playlist that follow a theme. Like one time we did one of, here are some of my favorite highlights of 90s romantic comedy scores, which I think is a wildly underappreciated sort of subgenre of film music, because the 90s saw scores like My Best Friend's Wedding and Father of the Bride, which was kind of the grand finale, because I think that score is absolutely gorgeous and one of my favorite Silvestri scores. And and he has so many classics that it's easy for that one to kind of get lost in between the Forrest Gumps and the Back to the Futures and the Predators of the world. But Father of the Bride 1 and 2 are spectacular scores. So just like, here's an hour of us talking about scores like that. Dave, James Newton Howard, is another absolutely amazing score. And so yeah, we do those. We did one all about the Alien franchise when Fireteam first came out, where I kind of said, here's some great Alien, some Alien 3. And if I would dare add myself to the playlist, we ended it with kind of the world premiere of here's a little sneak peek of Fireteam. And
nice.
But then on top of that, my girlfriend Angela, we started doing one. She's a painter, and so we kind of labeled our collaborative efforts Brushes and Keys, and so then she just had this idea a few months ago of, what if we did a Brushes and Keys podcast where we, it's a little bit more structured than it's a little closer to You Gotta Hear This, where it's kind of, we decide in advance the topic and we kind of think about it ahead of time so we can come to the table with something, as opposed to Play, Watch, Listen, where we just sit down and just say, so what's on your mind? And the 4 of us just immediately get lost in conversation, like 4 friends at a bar, basically.
Yeah.
And that's been really fun. And as if all those weren't, as if life weren't sort of crazy enough, DICE, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences that do the DICE Awards, they have a podcast called The Game Maker's Notebook, which is principally hosted by I think he's CEO is the correct title. I should know that by now. Essentially the founder of Insomniac, that make Ratchet and Clank and the Spider-Man, the Spider-Man, the unbelievably satisfying and amazing Spider-Man game. Ted Price he's sort of the host, talking to sort of fellow founder and CEO. I just looked it up because it was driving me crazy that I wasn't 100% confident in that. But yes, founder and CEO of Insomniac, Ted Price, is sort of the main host, where he talks to, colleagues, to the Tim Schafers, the Neil Druckmanns of the world, other kind of studio heads, particularly AAA studios, Respawn, whomever else. And it's a great podcast. I was very honored when they reached out to me and said, would you like to be kind of his parallel in the musical side? So it's basically just these I kind of got to pretend I was you in a way. It's led to just sort of shop talk, composer to composer, where I just get to call up a friend, say, oh, I saw that like for example, the new not Suicide Squad. What is it called? I'm already blanking. The new game that's coming out soon from Warner Brothers that The Flight have done. Gotham Knights, the new Gotham Knights game that's coming out soon. I've got a schedule to chat with them so we can talk a little Gotham Knights, we could talk a little Horizon, we could talk a little Assassin's Creed, to talk a little Alien Isolation. We do these like hour and a half long, not unlike your format, chats, where it's just kind of composer to composer, and I've been doing that the last several years, and it's been absolute joy, really, to have this format to just really get into it, nerd out with a fellow composer in a way that it's really all about them. It's not just the two of us talking, but it's very much their body of work as a whole. Usually it's most everybody are composers where we time it around whatever their latest release is, but they're people that have been around for a while. So we're able to talk about, years worth of interesting work they've done.
Nice.
And I've just loved it as an outlet. Obviously, as poor, unfortunate listeners discover, I can't really shut myself up too easily. And so to have an excuse, this whole world of podcasting, to have an excuse to just talk where I go, hey, if you don't like it, don't listen.
Right. Right.
It has been a fun outlet, I have to say. So yeah, it's been good to have those to go to and do and talk with buddies and make new friends. Got to meet new composers, and they've actually had me start to meet actors, because Troy is such a close friend. They said, let's have Troy on the Game Maker Notebook. So because I interviewed Troy initially just on the backs of our relationship, they then said, would you like to be kind of the actor host? So I did. I got to interview as my second actor, Maggie Robertson, who plays Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil, the sort of like instantly iconic character from Resident Evil Village. And she really is that character. She's not that character in the evil sense, but she is like, I'm 6, bordering on 6'1", and she's taller, I think, than I am. So she's just this commanding presence of a person, super outgoing and charismatic, and literally got to, meet her and then instantly turn on the mics and start recording, which is not normal for me to sort of meet someone in real time in a recorded format where all my kind of getting to know you questions are literally part of the show. And it's been really fun to do that too. And that's been a really novel experience. So,
wow.
In any case, it is. That's been fun.
I don't know how you keep up with all of it. I really don't. It's amazing.
Google Calendar.
Calendar, exactly.
I get my little alarms on my phone to know what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and that saves my life. And it's just fun. I mean, what all these have in common is they just come from a place of I like it. I love listening to creative people talk about their process. I'm insanely grateful that someone like you is interested in my process, and because it's fun to share, it's fun to say, here are the ideas that I came up with, and if anybody else finds them interesting, then that's cool, and if someone else finds them useful, even better. That's why it's fun to share. It's sort of this community of composers is so wonderful. I mean, you've been to GDC, you've been to the various Game Sound Con, those kinds of environments where it's a great community, and I feel this continuous gratitude to be part of it, and I consider this sort of thing one of multiple ways that I hopefully very obviously it's me trying to kind of give something to that community, because I owe them so much. I've met so many friends and collaborators and musicians and everything through these colleagues, and so many have become such dear friends that half the reason I like to do all this stuff is just the hope that I do my part to kind of leave it better than I found it. When I invariably disappear, either because my crazy Ponzi scheme has been found out and I got to hit the road and go all Edward Snowden and disappear, or my number comes up and my days are done. Whatever it is, I'd like to think that I added something to the community that meaningful, because God knows I got so much from the community that was so meaningful that it's the least I could do. Hopefully I give more than I get, but I get so much. It's hard to keep up, to be honest, because there really are that many just wonderful people. It is actually funny because I always used to say that the composers that tend to be most successful don't usually have a lot of composer friends. They tend to have a lot of director friends and game maker friends and editor friends and cinematographer friends. That tends to be what leads to them having work opportunities, because composers aren't in that, other than hiring typically younger, college, straight out of college types, like usually the ones that work for composers are slightly younger. No, that's not always the case, because there are some composers who do additional music and that kind of thing that are veterans that have been around a while, and they're actually very in demand in that role. But broadly speaking, like Dallas, he's, young guy, and any people I hire tend to be young and sort of fresh face, and you're giving them one of their first employment opportunities. And so meanwhile, most of my friends, people I talk to on the phone, hang out, have lunch, breakfast, dinner with, go to a party with, they tend to be directors. They tend to be, because that's just, I've always loved hanging out with that crowd. And obviously the fact that I naturally gravitate towards that crowd has had this byproduct of leading to career opportunities, because your friends tend to be in that side of the table. So I always kind of said I just thought, well, it doesn't bother me that most of my friends aren't composers. It kind of makes sense that I would just naturally gravitate towards a different crowd. But I have to say, especially catalyzed by all this podcasting and stuff, I've really shored up friendships with composer friends in the last 5 to 10 years in ways that feels new. Like I have a lot more friends, like close friends, that I really cherish their friendship in the composer world than I ever kind of thought I would have. And I really enjoy that these outlets give me an opportunity to kind of celebrate them and like shine a light on their work, and I get to know more about their process. And I love it's so much fun, like especially when it's someone who works in TV or something where there's kind of like Bear, for example. Bear McCreary has, over the last few years, he and I have become pretty close, and he's a phenomenally talented guy, and I have a really wonderful dynamic with him. And it's so fun when, like, each new episode of Rings of Power, to be able to like text and go, that cue at 27 minutes or whatever, that, like, boy, did you really save the day with that. I'm admittedly not super crazy about the show, but there can be no question on the quality of his work. And it actually like tricks me into enjoying it. I mean, I say that, look, some people are really, really harsh on it. I think that that's unfair. There's no question that thousands and thousands of people worked insanely hard on that show to make it all that it could be. Yeah. And I'm, as someone who has worked on things before that, got critically slammed, I have a bit of a soft spot for saying it's not as bad as you're saying it is. It's never that, but nothing is ever as bad. True shit is very rare. It's actually hard to make something shitty because everyone's trying their hardest. No one ever doesn't care. It doesn't matter how big or small their role is. The craft services people want to make sure that the cast are, well fed so that they can do a good job. Like, everybody cares. But nonetheless, I can't deny that I've been a little underwhelmed by the show. Partly had probably unfair expectations of it, since I, like so many others, big fan of Peter Jackson's films, and but Bear to me has absolutely just crushed it. I mean, it's just he already was great, even within this genre with God of War and whatnot. He's demonstrated a real kind of knack for that kind of grand, old-fashioned, very thematic kind of score. But it's been really gratifying to be able to just send messages going, I promise I'm not being some sycophant here, but once again, great shit, man. And so I got a bunch of composer friends that I take a lot of pleasure in doing that with, because there's just so much talent. There's just so much. There's just a lot of. It's such a fertile community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts is how people are so willing to share and kind of get together and have these round tables about what works for them and what new tricks they're trying. I mean, I say it all the time on this show, how wonderfully positive that community tends to be. Well,
and you are very much a part of that community because everybody, there's not a composer composers are in two camps. Those who have been on your show and those who want to be on your show. That's the only two types of composer. That's a true binary. And it's true because I don't know a single composer that has talked to you that hasn't felt so seen, because you get it. You obviously years of being kind of a professional music appreciator, as it were, like you really hear things. Your questions betray the fact that you really are listening and you actually get it and you get games in a way that's very atypical. I mean, I've had the great privilege of being interviewed and chatting with a lot of different outlets and folks, and there's always something different about talking to somebody, of which there are very few, and you are truly among that very precious small crowd of folks that you feel like they're not asking questions of like, what, like, how does one write for an orchestra? How can you hear the sounds in your head? It's like, I totally understand if you've never talked to a composer, that's probably a very understandable frame of reference. And I'm grateful if anybody takes any kind of interest. I'm deeply grateful. And if it's like a so-called mainstream, like a New York Times or something where, they probably don't typically talk. It's like the arts columnist who mostly talks to filmmakers or actors or something, and they're not really so accustomed to me to compose. And they're also asking questions, figuring their readers are never reading an interview with a composer before. Like there's a certain amount of that, and I don't ever want to come across like this is the 7,000th time I've answered this question, and it's kind of boring. But there's no question that it is the 7,000th time I've answered that question. And you've never been like that. You've always been coming from a place of like, the kind of meat and potatoes is old hat to you. And you like to ask questions about things that it belies an actual curiosity way beyond the surface. And so anyway, please don't ever regard us as a community on which you are in some sense an outsider. I don't believe that for a moment. And just, it's to me that to be able to kind of share this community with composers and also someone who kind of sees what all these composers are bending over backward trying to achieve and can actually kind of understand that, it's just it's so cool. I end up really looking forward to your episodes. There's sadly many I probably haven't heard, but I've listened to lots. Especially when it's like a close friend and I just am dying to hear what they have to say, or it's someone whose score I really loved and thought, I gotta check this out. It's like the perfect thing while I'm in my car or whatnot. And anyway, I would not feel complete if I didn't make you aware just how appreciated you are by me and by literally everybody else.
That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate it very much.
Just Austin. The facts.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. I mean, I loved this score. I loved all the time I got to spend with it. I also loved going back through and listening to the old film scores. I mean, I didn't listen to all of them all the way through, but just kind of spotting through and it was just a fun experience to do all this. So, thanks for writing such badass music as always, I guess.
Well, it was a little scary. The bar is high. Kevin Reipel did the sadly very maligned Colonial Marine score, but he did a great job. He's one of those guys that really everything he writes is very good. He's a real kind of force to be reckoned with, and a composer whose music I consistently find myself caught off guard by, where I'll hear it and I'll think, okay, I kind of get the gesture of this. And then 3 seconds later, I'm like, oh, well, I didn't see that coming. That was cool. That was like what a great, voicing that was. And it's like, oh, wow, that's a great little riff there. And it's just like this constant little kind of ear candy. And I remember, that Colonial Marines really held its own.
Yeah.
And it came up in conversation on Fireteam. I said, I don't want to do a second-rate Kevin Ripple either. That's he nailed it. So I'm glad that you found excuse to go revisit those masters. If that's all I contribute, if all I do is remind people of other better scores, then I'll take that, because they're masterpieces, that's for sure.
That's good stuff. Well, Austin, what else do you want to say before we head off?
As you can tell, I've really bit my tongue, so I appreciate you prompting me with this open-ended. Now the real fun begins. But no, I've subjected you to my ramblings far too much. Hopefully you'll edit this down to just sticks with boots on and nothing else. But no. As always, I'm grateful for the chance to chat and kind of ramble into oblivion, and your patient. Overly, you really need to kind of. I need to mail you I'm going to build a kind of Rube Goldberg style machine that has like a nun hand holding a ruler, and I'm going to give you a button to trigger it, so that when I reach the threshold of like yammering beyond any redeeming value, you can just hit it, and no matter where you are in the world, this little thing is going to come down and smack me on the wrist, and I will realize I've outworn my welcome. So in the meantime, your incredible saintly patience with me is hugely appreciated, and I wouldn't dare dream of saying anything else.
Okay. Well, Austin, thank you so much for all your time today. It's just been great, as always.
Pleasure is mine, and we'll do it again.